Welcome to the Everything Yachting YouTube channel. Our goal is to help yacht buyers, yacht owners, and yacht sellers through interesting, educational, and informative discussions on topics that are anything and everything yachting related. Thanks for joining us again. My name is Eric Gervais here at Marlowe Marine. We're aboard the 2020 66E Marlowe Explorer named Magic. Captain Tad, Tina, my assistant, and Summer, our marketing extraordinaire, are going to learn some things today from Captain Tad and what it takes to get us off the dock. We're going to do an engine room check. We're going to take the shore power cables in. We're going to start a generator. We're going to start the main engines, and we're going to go cruising. So have some fun, learn something.
Thank you, Eric. As he said, I'm Captain Tad, and today we're going to take this 66-foot E 2020 Marlowe Magic off the dock and go out for a ride. My two assistants here, Tina and Summer, we're going to talk about how we would do that and, taking this and trying to understand the orientation or what these different systems are. So what we wanted to start with was just explaining some of the steps that we're going to go through. The very first thing that we're going to do is we'll do an engine room check, make sure that all of that is set, that we have all of our systems checked down in that engine room. Then we're going to get our generator started up. We'll take off the shore power cords, switch the transfer over from shore to gen, and then move our way to getting the engine started up along with all the electronics. The first topic of conversation is just some explanations about what the systems are and why we're doing those things, because that's one thing that people sometimes don't grasp what happens with a boat, just a boat in general. This is the first time that I've run this boat, but they're all kind of the same. So let's talk about power of a boat. So there's three different systems of power, or systems that provide power to a yacht, that provides us our air conditioning, lighting, power to run all the different systems. So we talk, we say things like, oh, well, the shore power and the generators and the batteries, the inverter, all of this stuff, but sometimes that's kind of a foreign language and people don't really understand what we are talking about when we're saying those things. And until you really understand, you go, oh, I get it. Now I know why, somebody had a fit because the breaker was tripped on the shore power side. So there's three different systems that the boat gets power from. We either get it from the shore or from our power cords that come out of the back of the boat. They plug into a plug and then the breaker that's on the shore. Most boats, most Marlows will take two 50 amp big plugs, big power, big extension cords that run out from here that go to that shore power. And then that powers all of the boat systems. If we're not using shore power, we're using power generated by our generators, which are two diesel engines sitting down in the engine room that now will generate power to basically do the same thing that the plugs did before. Runs all of our systems, our domestic systems, from a water pump, air conditioning, stoves, lights, everything that you can think of, along with the battery chargers that keep the batteries charged up for the engines, for the house system, and for the generators and thrusters. So all of those things, those are our two main systems, if you would, of supplying power to the boat. The third is the batteries. We have batteries on board and we have house batteries. So we have a system, a bank of batteries that runs the domestic side of the boat. The lights, the washer machine, the dryer, the entertainment system, the stove, the oven. Those batteries we can take power out of those batteries, turn it to electrical power and make that happen through an inverter. It inverts from DC power or battery power to regular household power. So you can plug in and charge your phone, you can use a flat iron, you can use a hair dryer, whatever we need to use, we can use that from the batteries. When we're on batteries, we have a designated amount of time that we can use that, because obviously as the batteries get drained, so we have to be able to have access to that one of the other two power sources, either a generator or shore power. So those three systems are systems that we want to make sure that we're well aware of and what we're using, because there are limitations to each one of those. Shore power, the limitations are very small. It just depends on how much power we have coming to that pedestal. If the pedestal doesn't have an ample amount of power, we may not be able to run things like all of our air conditioning system, all of the chillers. If we have multiple water heaters, we may only be able to run one water heater, or else we start tripping a breaker on the dock because we're using too much power. When we have a generator running, the generators are sized in a way that it can generate enough power to run the entire boat. So that's probably our least concerning our power management mode we have to go into. Batteries are the most concerning because obviously if the batteries run down, now we have to start a generator, we have to start the engines to be able to get the juice back into the batteries because we have battery chargers that recharge those batteries. So because of that, we are very limited on battery power. So if we are plugged into batteries, we don't have access to big power draw items like a water heater, like the air conditioning. None of those things work when we're just on battery power. So we have to have a generator or shore power for those big power draw items. So if the weather's perfect and it's great and we just want to sit out and be quiet, we don't have a generator running, we're not attached to the dock, but we just want everything to be off, but we want to be able to turn on some music and sit and have a glass of wine, then that's great. We can be on battery power. And if we're conservative with that battery power, we could sit on battery for 4 or 5 days. But, you're not going to be able to use a curling iron or flat iron or, that stuff. But that's okay because we're just out in the middle just enjoying the weather and the beautiful scenery. So with that in mind, understanding those 3 different ways that we get power helps you to understand why do we have to unplug the boat? Why do we have to do this first and then that? Because we're just making sure that we're getting our power settled. So the first thing that we do before we get started is that we go down and we check the engine room. So we check to make sure that all the systems down there are in the right place and that we have correct fluid levels and things and that we're ready to go. So we're going to go ahead and leave here now. We're going to head down to the engine room on this beautiful 2020 66-foot Marlowe. Take a look at our engine room. Thanks. All right, and welcome to the engine room here on this 2020 66-foot Marlowe Magic. And we're here to do an engine room check, understand what we're looking at, what we're looking for, anything that's going to be surprising or things that are going to stand out to us that may, tell us to, explore a little further. This is just a cursory check as we get ready to start up the boat and get ready to take a little cruise. The first thing that I'm looking at when I come into the engine room, I'm looking at the sole of the engine room. So I'm looking down, is there any water, oil, anything that, shouldn't be there is suddenly there? Well, that's going to insinuate that I've got a leak, that I've got some kind of issue going on somewhere. I'm just doing a general, visual inspection of the engine, trying to take a look to see if there's anything that stands out. If I see any leaks, runs, or oils, we have diapers or cloths underneath the engines. I'm looking for any oil drops or anything that looks like it would be out of the ordinary. I'm looking on the outboard side of the engines. I'm just glancing through the engine room, just getting a good, clear view of exactly what's going on and if everything looks like it's in its place. So just like we would our car, we're going to check the oil on the engines. Very simple. A dipstick here. We can just pull that dipstick out. We can take a look at our oil level and then place that right back in. Normally we'd have a towel, we'd wipe that off and go. Same thing on this side. I've already checked the oil, everything's good, but all we would do would be to pull that dipstick. I'm checking my fuel filters. These are Raycor fuel filters. These are for the generators, and then these are for the main engines. I'm just looking at the vacuum gauges that are here. And what that does, a vacuum gauge on these fuel filters, diesel engines need fuel, they need water to cool them, and they need air to breathe. So those 3 things. So the systems that I'm looking for is the oil to make sure that everything's lubricated inside of it, fuel to make sure that it's feeding the engine, and air is going to be right behind Tina here. These are the breathers that allow air to come into the engine room. So those 3 things are things that are going to tell us if there's something going on. So I'm looking at the vacuum gauges, and if I have too high of a vacuum, it goes into the red on these. If it goes into the red, that means that there's too much vacuum. That means that the filter is starting to get clogged and it's possibly time to change the filter. So those little clues are what's telling me, oh, I've got an issue coming on. I can monitor that up on my Caterpillar gauges up top, and I can look at those engine gauges. It can also tell me if the fuel pressure is rising or lowering. If I'm getting too low a fuel pressure, I'll see that number up there. Then I can start to go note to myself, hey, it's about time to switch the fuel filters. On these Raycor filters, they have a lever that we can change. All we have to do is pull the pin, turn the lever, and instead of this filter, it's now pulling off this filter. We can do that underway, so magically I've just changed that fuel filter. That's why there's 2 of them everywhere you see. So that's the reason for those fuel filters, so that I can change that fuel filter underway. So the engine can be up and running. I can come down here and we're cruising along at 20 knots and I can change the fuel filter. All just by throwing that, to the other side. If that's not the problem, then we can start to dig in further and look at changing the fuel filter on the engine. That's when we get to the level of, we got people for that. we got people for that one, right? Okay, so we've checked the engine oil, we've checked the fuel. We know that we don't have too much vacuum, too much positive pressure in these fuel filters, so we know that 2 of those elements are good. We're going to take a look at, this is what cools the engine. So this is antifreeze. So this is like antifreeze that you put in your car. It's just made by Caterpillar, so it's a different brand. But we look to make sure that we've got ample fluid in these overflow bottles that go into what we would think of on a car as a radiator. So that's exactly what that is. So it just takes that into there. It then takes, instead of in your car, you have a grill on the front of your car that lets air blow past the radiator. Well, in here, we don't have that. There's no grill for us to have cool air blowing past that radiator. So what they use instead is seawater, because that's cold, right? Or cooler than than what's going to be inside this engine room. So that water flow goes through the radiator, and it's a heat exchanger. It exchanges heat with that coolant, and that's what keeps the engine cool. Because we don't have a grill on the front of our boat, we have a hole in the bottom of the boat that sucks in seawater, and that's what keeps the engines cool. That's what keeps the generators cool. That's what keeps this cool. So that's that raw water flow that we have coming through. The last thing that I'm looking at is my fuel gauge. And on a Marlowe, all Marlows have sight gauges, which as a captain, as an owner, you love. Because we have fuel gauges that are up at the dash, and they say, they measure electronically with a sender down into the tank that says this is how many gallons of fuel you have. But I always am second guessing that. Because I'm like, is it right? Seems like I've run longer. Seems like I should have more fuel. Seems like I should have less fuel. I love the fact of being able to actually put eyes on a sight gauge and know for sure, by what I see here, how many gallons of fuel we have on board. In all Marlows, we have a sight gauge. Some of them have the lever on the top. Some of them have the lever on the bottom. This one happens to be on the bottom. All we do is open the lever. So that's the purge valve down at the bottom. And then we push this top up here. When we push the top, the fuel seeks its level in the tank behind this wall. And there is the fuel tank, and there's a stick here that tells us how much fuel is on this boat. So now we know that we have 519 gallons of fuel on board the vessel at this time, right now, which is so comforting as an owner or a captain or as crew to know this is exactly how much fuel we have, because that could really ruin our day.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So for that, we want to make sure that we know that. I always come back and make sure that that valve is closed. Again, I'm just kind of looking around, making sure. You can see here on this air filter, there's a little sensor right here, and it does the same thing that the fuel filters does. This is an air filter, filters the air as it goes into the engines, the turbos, all of that stuff. And I'm looking to make sure that those sensors aren't tripped. If it was tripped or creating too much pressure, it would read red. So those are the kind of things that I'm looking for when I say I'm just doing a general visual check. If this is showing me a red sensor, I know that this air filter is starting to get clogged, and I need to clean it, change it, or call, because we got people for that, to take care of that. Because if not, something's going to happen, and we're going to get a code when we're running the boat that says, hey, you've got to stop the boat. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Make sense? So that's just our basic cursory overview, just an easy visual check on what happens in, when I'm here. If, if the boss says, hey, come down and do an engine room check, that's what I'm going to do. If the boss says, I'm going to go do an engine room check, that's what they're doing. And it helps to know as crew what they're looking for. What are you doing down there? Were you on the phone? What the heck? And so by understanding that, it helps you understand what goes into the whole voyage of the vessel. So when we understand all those little bitty things, you start to understand, oh, there's a lot of stuff that has to go right for this to all work. Marlowe makes it easy for us to be able to get around that engine room and take a look. Make sense?
Yeah.
Great. We can go ahead and move back up top and take a look at our next step at getting our generator started and ready to move.
Thanks for joining us at Everything Yachting. I hope you've enjoyed diving into the yachting world today. If you've enjoyed or learned something, please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more. Until next time, my friends, healthy families, happy memories, and may fair winds and smooth seas guide your future yachting adventures.